Today we're going to be talking about variables and values in JavaScript. So there are several different kinds of basic values in JavaScript, and I will go over each of them in turn. So the first kind is the string. The string is any series of characters enclosed in quotes. So if you want to see this, for instance, if we type in hello world enclosed by quotes, there will be a string. And we can evaluate this to see what the representation of it looks like inside JavaScript. So strings can be manipulated using the plus sign from concatenation, which is really intuitive. So if I type, for instance, hello plus world, I get hello world as expected. And another thing with JavaScript is that strings can be enclosed within single or double quotes, and JavaScript doesn't make any distinction between them. So hello world in single quotes looks exactly the same. But it should be noted that if you want to get a quote inside a string, you need to escape it using the backslash character. For instance, if I want to have something like this, hi, I would have to use backslashes. So that's the string type. So the next type I'm going to be talking about is the number type. Numbers are pretty intuitive. They work the same, like they're just any series of digits. For instance, you have 10, 1 to 9. And I can also have decimal sort of numbers. And one thing to know about JavaScript is there's no difference between a floating point number and an integer number. So both numbers are represented in the same way in JavaScript. So there are also a few other ways you can specify numbers. Like for instance, for floating point, I can use the exponential notation. So for instance, this would be, I can represent 2000 as 2e3, which just means 2 times 10 to the power 3. And also I can get hexadecimal numbers using the 0x prefix. So for instance, 0xFF, this would mean FF in hexadecimal, which is 255. Okay, and okay. So next type I want to talk about is the Boolean type. So Booleans can just consist of two values, true or false, which is pretty obvious. If you type in true, you get a true value. If you type in false, you get a false value. And you can use operators to basically combine Boolean values. For instance, if I say true and true, that gives me true. And if I say true and false, that gives me false. So, and I also have the OR operator, true and false gives me true, and so on. So next value I'm going to be talking about is special value. It's called now. Now basically means nothing, zero, zilch. So the now value is not used very often, but if you want to say, like, if you want to have a default empty value, you can use now. And the final one I want to talk about is undefined, which is very similar to now, but not quite. So undefined, when we talk about variables, we see what it is. So let's go to variables very quickly. In JavaScript, when you want to declare a variable, you just type var followed by the variable name, which can be any series of letters or numbers. So say var x equals 10, for instance. This assigns the value 10 to the value 10 to the variable x. So now I can type x. I can get back the number 10. So Java variables are dynamically typed, which means I can there's no fixed type. I can assign it a string, for instance, and JavaScript will helpfully change the type of x to a string. So we mentioned earlier the value of undefined. So one thing is, if you have a variable name that JavaScript has not seen before, like y, for instance, we have not declared y, you return undefined. So yeah. And finally, I want to talk about the NaN type. No, the NaN value. This is a special number value. So if you try to do a numerical operation that's not well defined, like for instance, let's say the parseInt function, this gives you, normally turns a string into an integer. But say you give it a string that doesn't correspond to any integer, it will give you the NaN value. And that's about it for variables and values.